What happens when the world's most dangerous pirate enters a galaxy ruled by the Empire? Blackbeard has arrived in the Star Wars universe, and he has no intention of bowing to the Emperor or anyone else. With the power of the Yami Yami no Mi, the Gura Gura no Mi, and his ruthless ambition, Teach is about to turn the galaxy into his new hunting ground. But when the dark side senses his arrival, the Empire sends one of its most terrifying forces to stop him. Can Blackbeard conquer the Star Wars galaxy, or will he finally meet an enemy powerful enough to bring him down? So sit back, stay tuned, and let's get into the story. And if you enjoy these crossover adventures, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment which character you want to see enter another universe next. The twin sons of Tatooine usually offered nothing but a slow, blistering death to those foolish enough to wander the Dune Sea without a map or a prayer. But on this day, the heat was not the primary threat. High above the Jundland wastes, the sky didn't just darken, it bruised. A swirling vortex of impossible violet and ink-black energy tore through the atmosphere, screaming with the sound of 1,000 dying stars. It wasn't a hyperspace rupture, nor was it a natural celestial phenomenon. It was a wound, and from that wound, a massive laughing shadow plummeted toward the sands like a meteor of pure malice. When the dust settled near a remote Imperial surveillance outpost, the silence that followed was heavier than the heat. Marshal D. Teach, the man known to a distant world as Blackbeard, pulled himself from the crater. He stood nearly 11 feet tall, a mountain of a man draped in tattered captain's finery, his tricorn hat miraculously still perched atop his wild, greasy hair. He didn't look like any alien the Empire had logged in their archives. He looked like an ancient nightmare of the high seas, his chest bared, several flintlock pistols tucked into a sash that shouldn't have been able to hold their weight. He took a deep, rattling breath of the dry air, his missing teeth bared in a grin that would have made a rancor flinch. Zee-ha-ha-ha! The laugh boomed, vibrating the very foundations of the Imperial outpost a few hundred yards away. No sea, no salt, just sand as far as the eye can see, but the air is thick with something new, something powerful. He looked at his hands. Dark smoke, thicker and more viscous than any exhaust from a Corellian freighter, began to seep from his pores. The Yami Yami no Mi, the fruit of darkness, was restless. It felt the force that permeated this new reality, and it felt hungry. To Blackbeard, the force wasn't a mystical energy field that bound the galaxy together. It was just more light to be swallowed. Inside the outpost, Sergeant Krell of the Imperial 7th Garrison stared at his monitors in disbelief. "Contact the Star Destroyer in orbit," he barked to his comms officer. "Tell them we have an unidentified high-threat entity in Sector 4. It's not a Jedi, but the scanners are redlining on a localized gravity anomaly." "Sir, he's walking toward us?" the officer stammered. Blackbeard's boots crunched on the sand with rhythmic, terrifying, deliberate intent. He wasn't running. He didn't need to. Every step he took seemed to draw the light out of the world around him. He could feel the panic inside the Durasteel walls ahead. It tasted like fine wine. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button, and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The cycle continues. The outpost's heavy laser turrets whirred to life, tracking the massive intruder. Without a word of warning, they unleashed a barrage of crimson bolts. Teach didn't dodge. He didn't hide. He simply raised a massive, jewelry-encrusted hand. Black hole. The darkness didn't just block the lasers, it inhaled them. A carpet of absolute shadow spread out from Teach's feet, rushing across the dunes like an incoming tide. When it reached the outpost, the ground didn't just shake, it vanished. The reinforced Durasteel began to sink into the shadow, the screams of the stormtroopers inside muffled as they were dragged into an infinite abyss of null gravity. Sergeant Krell scrambled for his E-11 blaster rifle, firing wildly as the floor beneath him turned into a dark liquid. He saw the giant looming over him, the black smoke rising from his skin like a funeral pyre. What are you?" Krell gasped, his boots disappearing into the void. Teach reached down and plucked the blaster from the sergeant's hand as if it were a toy. He examined the sleek white plastic and the glowing power cell. With a casual squeeze of his fingers, he crushed the weapon into slag. "I'm a man with a dream, little soldier," Teach rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. And it looks like this galaxy is big enough for a real king to finally take what's his. He closed his fist, and the darkness surged. In a single violent slurp, the entire outpost, the turrets, and the men inside were gone, swallowed into the darkness of Teach's body. He stood alone in the desert again, the silence returning, though now he held a stolen Imperial datapad in his hand. He didn't know how to read the Aurebesh flickering on the screen, but he understood the map. He saw the dots representing thousands of inhabited worlds. He saw the shipping lanes of the spice trade. He saw the sheer, unadulterated scale of the Empire. In his world, the Grand Line was a narrow strip of ocean. Here, the Grand Line was the stars themselves. Zihahaha. A world without a sea, but a sea of stars. Teach laughed, the sound echoing off the distant mesas. Suddenly, his observation hockey flared. It was a cold, sharp prickling at the back of his neck. It wasn't the heat of the suns. It was a presence, cold, mechanical, and fueled by a bottomless well of disciplined rage. High above, hidden by the glare of the binary suns, a lone Imperial Lambda-class shuttle was descending, flanked by a squad of TIE fighters. They weren't here to investigate a disturbance. They were here to eliminate a threat to the Emperor's peace. Teach felt the shift in the air. He felt the dark side of the Force approaching, and to his surprise, it felt familiar. It felt like his own darkness but constrained, shackled by armor and philosophy. "Come then!" Blackbeard shouted at the sky, his left hand beginning to glow with a pale white sphere of energy. He didn't just want their ship, he wanted to see if the legends of this world could bleed. He braced his legs, the sand beneath his boots beginning to crack and spiderweb as he prepared to use the Gura Gura no Mi. Let's see if this sky can be broken. As the shuttle's landing gear deployed, and the whine of the ion engines grew deafening, Marshal D. Teach stood his ground. He was a man who had killed his own brother for power, a man who had toppled an empire of pirates, and a man who believed that fate was something you took by the throat. The Empire had spent decades bringing order to the galaxy through fear. They were about to learn that there was something far more terrifying than a Moff or a Star Destroyer. There was a pirate. The Lambda-class shuttle hovered, its three wings folding upward like the predatory limbs of an insect as it prepared to land. The TIE fighters shrieked overhead, their twin ion engines creating a piercing howl that would have paralyzed a lesser man. To Marshal D. Teach, it was simply noise, the desperate buzzing of flies before the swatter came down. He stood in the center of the desert, a dark monolith against the shifting sands, his grin widening as the boarding ramp of the shuttle hissed open. A squad of stormtroopers marched out, their white armor gleaming with a sterile, oppressive perfection. They moved with the mechanical precision of men who believed they were the highest authority in the galaxy. At their head was an Imperial captain, his hand hovering over a specialized stun baton. He looked at the massive, disheveled pirate and felt a flicker of genuine confusion. This wasn't a Jedi. There was no lightsaber, no noble robes. This was a barbarian. By order of the Galactic Empire, you are under arrest for the destruction of Imperial property and the unauthorized use of gravitational weaponry, the captain projected through his helmet's vocoder. Surrender now, or we will be forced to use lethal. Zee-ha-ha-ha! The laugh cut through the captain's threat like a rusted blade. Teach didn't wait for the sentence to finish. He shifted his weight, his massive legs carving deep grooves into the sand. He pulled his right fist back, and a translucent, spherical bubble of white energy began to shimmer around his knuckles. The Empire, eh? I've heard that word before, Teach rumbled. But an empire is only as strong as the ground it stands on. Let's see how yours holds up when the world decides to scream. He punched the air. He didn't hit the stormtroopers. He didn't hit the shuttle. He hit the very atmosphere. With a sound like a continent snapping in half, the air in front of Blackbeard's fist shattered. Visible cracks, like fractured glass, spiderwebbed across the sky, glowing with a dull, terrifying light. The shockwave that followed was not wind. It was a tectonic shift in three-dimensional space. The stormtroopers were turned into white-armored shrapnel instantly, their bodies tossed aside as the ground beneath them erupted in a violent upheaval of rock and sand. The Lambda shuttle, despite its sophisticated stabilizers, was slammed backward as if hit by a falling moon. Its wings snapped, the durasteel buckling under the sheer physical pressure of the quake. The TIE fighters overhead weren't spared. The atmospheric distortion caused by the shattered air sent them into uncontrollable spins. their fragile solar wings shearing off before they slammed into the mesas in plumes of oily fire. Blackbeard stood amidst the devastation, the dust coating his dark skin. He walked toward the wreckage of the shuttle, stepping over the groaning remains of the Imperial captain. Teach reached down, grabbing the man by the neck and lifting him until they were eye to eye. "You have ships that fly between the stars," Teach said, his voice a low, terrifying purr. "You have weapons that burn like the sun. But you're soft. You rely on your toys to do the fighting for you." The captain gasped, his vision blurring. "Lord, Vader will find you." "Vader?" Teach's eyes glinted with a hungry curiosity. "I hope so. I want to meet the biggest fish in this pond. But for now, I need a crew. And I need a bigger boat." He dropped the captain into the sand and turned his attention to the shuttle's cockpit. It was ruined, but the navigational computer was still sparking with life. He realized then that he couldn't just sail these stars alone. He needed people who knew the terrain. Men who weren't bound by Imperial codes or rebel dreams. He needed the scavengers, the killers, and the desperate. Blackbeard didn't head for the major spaceports. His hockey told him that would be too loud too soon. Instead, he began a grueling march toward the outskirts of Mos Eisley. He moved with a speed that defied his bulk, his legs carrying him across miles of desert in hours. By the time the 3 moons of Tatooine rose, he was standing at the entrance of a darkened cantina on the edge of the city, a place where the Empire's light rarely reached, and where life was bought and sold for a handful of credits. The door hissed open, and the smell of stale ale, sweat, and ozone hit him. The chatter of a dozen alien languages died instantly as the 11-foot-tall pirate stepped inside. He didn't look like a traveler, he looked like an omen. Teach walked to the center of the room, his boots thudding heavily on the stone floor. He ignored the various bounty hunters and smugglers reaching for their blasters. He went straight to the bar, grabbed a bottle of high-proof Corellian whiskey, and drained half of it in one go. "Listen up, you scum," he roared, slamming the bottle down so hard the counter cracked. "My name is Marshall D. Teach. I've just arrived from a place you've never heard of, and I've decided this galaxy is my new playground. I'm looking for the meanest, most cold-blooded pilots and killers in this room, those who want to see the Empire burn and their pockets overflow with gold." A Trandoshan bounty hunter, his reptilian eyes narrowed in contempt, stood up from a corner booth. He leveled a heavy disruptor rifle at Teach's chest. "You're loud, human, and you're worth a lot of credits if the Empire is already looking for a gravity user. Why should we follow a dead man?" Teach didn't even turn to look at him. He simply raised his left hand, and the shadows in the room began to bleed toward him. The lights flickered and died, consumed by a growing void. "Because," Teach said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that echoed in the minds of everyone present. "The darkness is coming for everyone. You can either be behind it or in front of it." Suddenly, the Trandoshan was yanked forward. It wasn't a force pull, it was an irresistible gravitational collapse. He screamed as he flew across the room, only to be caught by the throat in Teach's massive hand. The pirate's palm began to emit a thick, black smoke that seemed to erase the Trandoshan's very presence. "Kurozu," Teach muttered. The bounty hunter's disruptor rifle disintegrated as the darkness touched it. His scales began to gray, his strength siphoned away into the abyss of Teach's body. The others in the cantina watched in horror as their comrade was systematically emptied of his will to fight. Teach tossed the shivering Trandoshan aside like a piece of refuse. "Now," Blackbeard said, his missing teeth bared in that horrific grin. "Who wants to be a king?" In the silence that followed, a few figures stepped forward. A disgraced Corellian pilot with a facial scar, a pair of Deveronian mercenaries, and a spindly assassin droid with its combat protocols overridden. They didn't see a savior, and they didn't see a hero. They saw a monster who promised them the galaxy. "Zee-ha-ha-ha. Good," Teach laughed, clapping his hands together. "First, we steal a ship that can carry more than just us. Then, we head for the smuggler's moon. I hear Nar Shaddaa is where the real filth hides. And that's where we'll build my fleet." As he led his new crew out into the Tatooine night, Teach looked up at the stars. He could feel the vastness of the galaxy now, the billions of souls crying out in fear or ambition. To most, it was a terrifying expanse. To him, it was just a larger sea to be conquered. The world government of his home had been powerful, but this galactic empire, they were arrogant. They thought they owned the Force. Teach clenched his fist, and for a brief second, the shadows around his feet seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. He would show them that the Force was nothing compared to the hunger of a man who would never sleep until he sat upon the highest throne in existence. "Set course for the Outer Rim," Teach commanded his pilot. "The Blackbeard pirates are going to the stars." The Fortress Inquisitorius, on the oceanic moon of Nur, was a place of cold shadows and sharp edges, but today, the darkness within its halls felt thin. Deep within the meditation chambers, the second sister, Trilla Suduri, snapped her eyes open. She didn't breathe. She listened to the Force. For weeks, the galaxy had felt like a tightening drum, but something had just pierced the skin. It wasn't the flickering light of a surviving Jedi. It was a gravitational scream, a void so absolute that it didn't just ripple through the Force, it seemed to consume it. "An anomaly on Tatooine," she whispered, her voice a lethal rasp. "Too massive to be a hidden Padawan, too chaotic to be a master." By the time the second sister's stealth corvette intercepted the stolen Imperial freighter Obsidian Vulture in the mid-rim, Blackbeard had already made himself at home. The ship's bridge was a disaster area of spilled grog, half-eaten roasted gorg, and shattered consoles. Teach sat in the captain's chair, a seat far too small for his frame, flipping a heavy gold coin he'd taken from a Hutt's dead treasurer. His new crew was terrified. Jax, the scarred Corellian pilot, gripped the flight yoke so hard his knuckles were white. "We're being pulled out of hyperspace. It's an Imperial interdictor. We're caught in a tractor beam." Teach didn't move. He took a long, slow swig from a bottle of stolen wine and wiped his mouth with the back of a hairy, ring-laden hand. "Zahahaha, let them pull. A king doesn't go hunting for his dinner when the dinner comes knocking on his door. Open the docking bay. Let them in." The Obsidian Vulture shuddered as the Imperial craft latched onto its hull. The hiss of the airlocks was followed by the rhythmic, heavy thud of purge trooper boots. Then, the silence changed. It became cold. The kind of cold that seeped into the marrow. The bridge doors slid open, and the second sister stepped through, her black cape billowing like smoke, her visor reflecting the chaotic red lights of the bridge. Behind her, 6 purge troopers leveled their DC-15 LE rifles. She didn't speak immediately. She looked at Teach, her head tilting with a predatory grace. "You are the one." The ripple in the dark. Teach stood up, his massive shadow stretching across the bridge, cast by the flickering emergency lights. He stood nearly double her height, a mountain of meat and malice. "You're a skinny one, aren't you? And that mask, what are you hiding? A face full of fear?" "I am the second sister of the Inquisitorius," she replied, her hand drifting to the circular hilt of her double-bladed lightsaber. "You have stolen Imperial property and murdered a garrison. But more importantly, you possess a power that does not belong to you. The Emperor demands to know its origin before I erase you from existence." Teach let out a low, rumbling chuckle that grew into a deafening roar of laughter. "The Emperor? I've dealt with gods and kings before, girl. They all think they own the world until someone cracks it beneath their feet." The second sister didn't hesitate. With a snap hiss, her crimson blades ignited, spinning in a lethal blur of light. She lunged, a streak of black and red, moving with the preternatural speed of the Force. She didn't aim for a limb, she aimed for his heart. Teach didn't draw his pistols. He didn't even move his feet. He simply raised his left arm, his palm open. Kurozu, a swirl of ink-black smoke, erupted from his palm, forming a localized gravity well. The second sister, mid-leap, felt the Force scream in protest. It wasn't just a pull, it was an erasure. The momentum of her leap was hijacked, her body yanked forward with bone-snapping force, directly toward Teach's reaching hand. She gasped, trying to use a force push to repel him, but as her energy touched the darkness, it vanished. The dark side she wielded, her hatred, her pain, was sucked into the abyss of Teach's sleeve. Her lightsaber blade sputtered, the plasma flickering as if struggling to maintain its form in a vacuum. Teach's massive fingers closed around her throat. The purge troopers opened fire. Crimson bolts rained down on Teach's back. He didn't flinch. The Yami Yami no Mi absorbed the heat and the kinetic energy, though the pain made his eyes bulge and his teeth grind. That was the curse of his power. He felt every bit of the hurt, amplified by the darkness. "It burns, doesn't it?" Teach hissed into the second sister's visor, his face inches from hers. "The pain is real, but the darkness? It's more real. He slammed her into the deck, plating with enough force to dent the durasteel. Still holding her throat, he began to radiate a thick, oily miasma. The second sister clawed at his wrist, her fingers glowing with the desperate effort to call upon the force. She tried to choke him, to crush his windpipe from the inside. "It's not working," she choked out, her voice filled with a terror she hadn't felt since the purge of the Jedi Temple. "The Force. I can't find it." "That's because you rely on a feeling," Teach roared. "The darkness isn't a feeling, it's a physical law. My body is a black hole. Your force is just more light for me to swallow." He lifted his right fist, the white sphere of the Gura Gura no Mi manifesting around it. The air began to vibrate, a high-pitched whine that made the purge troopers' helmets crack. "Wait!" she screamed, her visor shattering under the pressure, revealing a single wide eye filled with tears of agony. "Too late for mercy!" Teach yelled. He punched downward, hitting the air just above her chest. The shatter point exploded. The shockwave didn't just break her ribs. It sent a vibration through the entire freighter, snapping the tractor beam lock from the Imperial Corvette outside, and sending the purge troopers flying through the bulkheads like rag dolls. The second sister was driven through the floor, falling through 2 decks before landing in the cargo hold, her armor shattered, her connection to the force fractured and bleeding. Teach stood over the hole he'd made, breathing heavily, smoke rising from his scorched back where the blaster bolts had hit. He looked down at the broken Inquisitor. He could have finished her. He could have jumped down and crushed her skull. But his hockey caught a new scent. Far off in the distance, through the rift in the hull, he saw the flickering lights of a massive city planet. Nar Shaddaa. And closer, he felt a presence much, much heavier than this girl. A presence that felt like a machine, made of cold, infinite hate. "Jax!" Teach shouted, turning back to the terrified pilot. "Forget the Inquisitor. She's broken. Get us into the atmosphere of the smuggler's moon. We need to disappear into the filth before the big one arrives." Jax didn't ask questions. He pushed the throttles to the firewall. The obsidian vulture groaned, its structural integrity compromised, but it dived toward the neon-soaked clouds of Nar Shaddaa. Teach walked to the shattered viewport, watching the Imperial Corvette struggle to regain its orientation. He reached down and picked up the second sister's fallen lightsaber. He ignited it, the red blade humming in his hand. It was small, like a toothpick in his massive grip. Zihahaha, a glowing sword. He extinguished it and tucked it into his belt next to his pistols. A trophy for the start of a new era. Tell your Emperor, girl, if he wants his galaxy back, he's going to have to come and take it from the bottom of a black hole. As the ship plummeted into the lawless depths of the smuggler's moon, Blackbeard looked at his crew. They weren't just terrified anymore. They were worshippers. They had seen a god of the new order fall before a man of the old sea. The conquest of the stars had truly begun. Nar Shaddaa was a rotting jewel of neon and filth, a vertical city where the air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen, heavy metals, and desperation. The obsidian vulture descended into the smog-choked lower levels of Sector 81, its engines sputtering a final, dying breath, before settling onto a rusted landing platform. The platform groaned under the weight of the ship, but more so under the presence that stepped off the ramp. Marshal D. Teach looked up at the endless tiers of the smuggler's moon, his eyes reflecting the flickering holographic advertisements for spice and pleasure droids. "Ha ha ha ha, now this is a place I can breathe," Teach shouted, his voice echoing off the grimy durasteel spires. Behind him, Jax and the others huddled, looking like ghosts in the neon haze. They were deep in the territory of the Pike Syndicate, a sector where the Empire didn't dare to tread without an army. "Captain," Jax whispered, glancing at the shadowy corners of the landing bay, where several dozen figures were already gathering. "This is the Corellian sector. It's run by a basilisk named Vorak. He doesn't like uninvited guests, and he definitely doesn't like rivals." Teach didn't answer. He was too busy adjusting his belt, the stolen red lightsaber of the second sister clinking against his flintlocks. He began to walk toward the main lift, his massive boots creating small cracks in the permacrete with every step. They were met halfway by a wall of mercenaries, Weequays, Rhodians, and a particularly large basilisk with 4 mechanical arms grafted to his back. Vorak stood at the center, smoking a thick, green cigar that smelled like burning swamp gas. He looked up at Teach, his eyes narrowing. "You're the one the holocrimes are talking about," Vorak rumbled, his forearms crossing over his massive chest. The Shadow Giant. They say you took down an Inquisitor. Impressive. But an Inquisitor is just a girl with a stick. Here, we deal in credits and blood. This platform costs 10,000 credits a minute, stranger. You got the coin, or do I have to recycle your ship for scrap? Teach stopped 3 feet from the basilisk. He looked down, a slow, yellow-toothed grin spreading across his face. Recycle my ship? Zahahaha. You have a lot of heart for a slug in a suit. But you've got it all wrong, Vorak. I'm not here to pay rent. I'm here to tell you that this sector is under new management. From this tier to the very top, everything belongs to the Blackbeard pirates. The mercenaries erupted in laughter. Vorak blew a cloud of smoke into Teach's face. You and what army, big man? You've got a pilot with a twitch, 2 Deveronian cowards, and a droid that looks like it's held together by spit. I've got 500 blasters in this building alone. Teach's eyes darkened. The humor didn't leave his face, but the temperature around him seemed to drop 40 degrees. An army? He whispered. I don't need an army. I am the darkness that swallows armies. He raised his right hand, and the air around it began to distort. The white, glowing sphere of the Gura Gura no Mi flared into existence, illuminating the alley with a ghostly, pulsing light. The laughter died instantly. Vorak stepped back, his forearms uncrossing as he reached for a heavy repeater slung over his shoulder. Wait, Vorak started. Too late to talk, Teach roared. He didn't punch a person, he punched the ground. The impact was silent for a fraction of a second, a localized stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. Then, the smuggler's moon screamed. The tremor didn't just shake the platform, it traveled through the structural pylons of the entire sector. The massive Durasteel skyscraper they stood on, a structure that housed thousands of beings, groaned as its foundations were systematically shattered. The landing platform buckled, sending Vorak's mercenaries tumbling into the abyss of the lower levels. The basilisk himself was slammed into a wall by the sheer kinetic force, his mechanical arms snapping like twigs. Above them, massive holographic displays shattered, raining glass and sparks down like a neon storm. A neighboring tower, unable to withstand the sympathetic vibrations, began to lean precariously, its structural supports shearing with a sound like a dying god. Zehahaha! Look at it! It's all so fragile! Teach screamed over the roar of the collapsing city. He turned to his crew, who were clinging to the obsidian vulture for dear life. Jax, get the word out! Tell every lowlife, every thief, and every outcast on this moon that Marshal D. Teach is here. Tell them that if they want to live, they bring me their ships, their weapons, and their loyalty. This isn't just a sector anymore. It's my fortress. In the hours that followed, the chaos of the Great Tremor of Sector 81 rippled across Nar Shaddaa. Blackbeard didn't stop with one tower. He moved through the district like a force of nature. When the Pike Syndicate sent a fleet of cloud cars to stop him, he simply stood on a balcony and used the Yami Yami no Mi to pull the entire squadron into a single, swirling vortex of black smoke, crushing the ships into a ball of compressed metal before spitting them back out into the streets below. By midnight, the basilisk Vorak was gone, absorbed into the darkness of Teach's palm along with his most loyal lieutenants. The rest of the mercenaries, seeing a man who could shatter buildings with a touch and swallow blaster fire with a grin, knelt. They didn't have a choice. Teach took over the penthouse of the highest spire in the sector. He sat on a throne of scavenged TIE fighter parts, looking out over the glowing sprawl of the moon. He had his crew, and now he had his town. But he wasn't satisfied. He looked at the Imperial datapad he'd stolen on Tatooine, which was now being decoded by his override droid. The Empire is coming, Jack said, walking onto the balcony. He looked exhausted, his face covered in soot. The sensors are picking up Star Destroyers entering the system, not one or two. A full blockade. They can't ignore what you did here, Captain. You didn't just kill people, you damaged the moon's infrastructure. You threatened the spice flow. Teach took a bite of a large purple fruit and chewed loudly, juice running down his beard. Good. Let them come. A blockade is just a wall, Jax. And I've never met a wall I couldn't break. He looked up at the stars, his hockey reaching out. He could feel the presence from before, the cold, mechanical hate, getting closer. It was a weight in the Force so heavy it felt like a physical pressure on his chest. Vader, Teach whispered, the name tasting like iron. He's coming for his little sister's killer. Z ha ha ha! Let him come! I want to see if the dark side is as deep as my abyss. Teach stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony, looking down at the thousands of pirates and mercenaries now gathering in the streets below, shouting his name. He had created a pirate paradise in the heart of the galaxy's most lawless world. It was a beacon for every dreamer and every killer in the stars. The Empire thought they could control the galaxy through fear, but fear was a tool that only worked until people met something they feared more. Blackbeard raised his arms, his massive silhouette framed by the glowing neon of Nar Shaddaa, and let out a laugh that drowned out the sirens of the approaching Imperial fleet. The dream wasn't just to be a pirate anymore. In this galaxy, a man could be more. A man could be a void that consumed everything. The sky above Nar Shaddaa had turned from a neon-lit haze into a ceiling of gray steel. 12 Imperial Star Destroyers had transitioned out of hyperspace, their triangular silhouettes blotting out the stars and casting long, oppressive shadows over the smuggler's moon. The blockade was absolute. Nothing was leaving the atmosphere, no spice freighters, no luxury yachts, and certainly not the scarred freighter belonging to the man who had dared to break an Inquisitor. Turbo laser fire occasionally lanced down from the orbit, precision strikes designed to disable the power grids of the towers Blackbeard had claimed. The Empire wasn't just coming to arrest a criminal. They were coming to excise a tumor. Marshal D. Teach sat in his makeshift throne, leaning back as he picked his teeth with the tip of a vibroblade. The floor of the penthouse vibrated with the distant thunder of orbital bombardment, but he didn't look concerned. He looked bored. In front of him, guarded by his spindly assassin droid and two shaking Deveronian mercenaries, stood a woman who looked vastly out of place. She wore a flight suit stained with grease and a rebel insignia partially hidden by a blast vest. Her name was Hera, a commander of a small, local cell that had been hiding in the moon's lower bowels for months. "You're a hard man to reach, Marshal Teach," she said, her voice steady despite the fact that she was standing in a room filled with black smoke and the stench of violence. "Most people are running for the escape pods. You're sitting here eating fruit while the Executor's shadow is literally falling over your head." Teach let out a low, wet chuckle. "Escape pods? To where? The Empire owns the stars, girl. If I run, I'm just a rat in a different cage. But if I stay, if I fight, the cage might just break." He leaned forward, his massive bulk casting her in shadow. "You didn't come here to warn me about the blockade. You came because you're desperate. Your rebellion is a spark in a hurricane, and you've realized that a hurricane can only be fought with a volcano." Hera tightened her grip on her sidearm. "We don't like your methods. We heard what you did to the sector. Thousands of civilians are homeless because you wanted to play king of the hill. But my intelligence officers say you have something we need. You cracked the encryption on the Second Sister's personal shuttle. You have the Imperial transit codes for the Midrim." "I do," Teach rumbled, tossing the datapad into the air and catching it. "And I know where they're moving their Kyber shipments. Thousands of crystals, destined for some big project in the deep core. The Empire loves their secrets, don't they?" "Give us those codes," Hera demanded. "With them, we can lure the blockade away. We can strike their supply lines and give this moon a chance to breathe. In return, we'll provide the coordinates for a safe jump through the outer rim. Somewhere even Vader won't find you." Teach's grin vanished, replaced by a look of predatory intensity. "A safe jump? To a hole in the dirt where I can hide like a coward? Zahahaha. You misunderstand me, Rebel. I don't want safety. I want the heart." Hera frowned. "The heart? You mean the Kyber heart of Jeddah?" "It's a myth, Teach. A legend from the old Jedi Order about a concentrated mass of living crystal that can power a world. It's been lost since the High Republic." "It's not lost," Teach whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, hungry energy. "My darkness can feel it. It's a pulse in the Force, a light so bright it's practically begging to be swallowed. I've seen what your Kyber can do. It focuses energy. It amplifies. Imagine what happens when my gravity, the power to crush stars, meets a crystal that can focus that power into a single point. I wouldn't just be a pirate. I'd be the man who holds the galaxy's throat in his hand." He stood up, the floorboards groaning. He walked past her to the edge of the balcony, ignoring the blaster fire of the Deveronians who were nervously watching the door. "I'll give you your codes. I'll even give you the Obsidian Vulture and its crew to help your little distraction. but you're going to give me the location of the Imperial Research Facility on the moon of Algora. I know the heart was moved there for analysis." "That's suicide," Hera said. "Algora is a fortress. It's guarded by a planetary shield and a garrison of 10,000. Even if you get past the blockade, you'll be dead the moment you touch the atmosphere." "Dead?" Teach laughed, and the sound was so loud it seemed to rattle the Star Destroyers in the sky. "People have been telling me I'm dead since I was a boy on a raft." "But dreams? A man's dream never dies. The Empire thinks they've won because they have more metal and more men, but they don't have the will to gamble it all on a single throw of the dice." He turned back to her, his hand suddenly erupting in a swirl of black smoke. He didn't attack her, but the sheer pressure of the Yami Yami no Mi made her drop to one knee. The air in the room felt like lead. "You want your freedom, little rebel? Then help me create a chaos so great that the Emperor himself has to look away from his throne to see who's burning his house down." Hera looked up at him, seeing not a liberator, but a monster that the galaxy had perhaps earned through its own cruelty. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small, encrypted holochip. The coordinates for Algora, and the shield frequency for the backdoor entrance through the canyons. "But if you fail, if you get captured, the rebellion will deny you ever existed." Teach snatched the chip from her hand, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. "Zee ha ha ha! Oh, they won't forget me, girl. By the time I'm done with Algora, the name Marshal D. Teach will be written in the stars in letters of fire." He barked an order to his droid, and the Imperial codes were transmitted to the rebel frequency. As Hera hurried out, desperate to escape before the next wave of TIE bombers arrived, Teach turned his gaze back to the Imperial fleet. One ship in particular caught his eye, the Devastator. It was larger, darker, and moved with a terrifying grace. He could feel it now, the cold, mechanical pulse of Darth Vader, watching the moon like a hawk. Teach raised his right hand, the pale white sphere of the Gura Gura no Mi manifesting. He didn't punch, he just felt the vibration of the world, the way the smuggler's moon was struggling under the weight of the blockade. "Patience, Lord Vader," Teach whispered to the wind. "I'm not ready for you yet. I need a bigger hammer to break that armor of yours. But soon I'll show you what happens when the dark side meets the absolute void." He turned to Jax, who had just entered the room, looking pale. "Captain, the rebels are moving. They're launching 100 decoy ships. The blockade is shifting to intercept. This is our chance." "Then get the engines hot, Jax," Teach roared, his cape billowing as he walked toward the lift. "We're going to a moon of crystal, and then we're going to shatter the very idea of Imperial peace." As the stolen shuttle took flight, slipping into the slipstream of the rebel distraction, Blackbeard looked back at Nar Shaddaa. The moon was burning, but to him, it was just the first fire of a very long night. He was a pirate, and a pirate didn't care about the world he left behind, only the one he was about to conquer. The stolen Imperial shuttle, renamed the Fate's Hand by Teach in a moment of rare poetic vanity, screeched through the upper atmosphere of Nar Shaddaa. Below, the smuggler's moon was a tapestry of explosions and tracer fire as the rebel distraction went into full, suicidal effect. Dozens of freighters and snub fighters were being shredded by the blockade's overwhelming fire. But the chaos had created the narrow corridor Teach needed. "Shields are holding at 40%, Jax yelled over the roar of the ion engines. "But we've got a problem, Captain. One of the heavy hitters just broke formation." "It's the Vigilance, a Nebula-class Star Destroyer. They've locked onto our signature. They know we aren't part of the rebel fleet." Teach stood behind the pilot's chair, his massive hands gripping the headrest so hard the padding hissed. He looked out the viewport at the approaching wall of gray hull. The Vigilance was a beast of a ship, a newer model designed for heavy ship-to-ship combat, bristling with turbo-laser batteries. As they watched, a flickering blue beam lashed out from the Star Destroyer's underside. The shuttle lurched violently. The whine of the engines climbed to a localized scream. "Tractor beam!" Jax cried out, his hands flying over the console. "It's too strong. We're being pulled into their primary docking bay. We're done for." "Done?" Teach rumbled, his eyes widening with a terrifying manic glee. "Ha-ha-ha! You still think like a victim, Jax. They aren't pulling us into a trap. They're giving us a bridge." "Stop fighting it. Divert all power to the forward shields and brace for impact. We aren't going to the docking bay. We're going to the source." On the bridge of the Vigilance, Admiral Corlin stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the small shuttle struggle in the tractor beam's grip. He was a man of the new order, precise, arrogant, and utterly convinced of the Empire's technological superiority. "Bring them in slowly," Corlin commanded. "The Inquisitorius wants the pilot alive, but the giant, the Emperor, has expressed a personal interest in his remains. If he resists, vent the bay." "Admiral!" the sensor officer shouted. "The shuttle isn't slowing down. They've cut their stabilizers and accelerated into the beam's vector. They're going to hit the bridge deflector array. Adjust the beam. Repel them." Corlin barked, but it was too late. The Fate's hand didn't just fly into the Star Destroyer. It became a kinetic slug. Teach had used the Yami Yami no Mi to coat the hull of the shuttle in a layer of absolute darkness, absorbing the initial impact of the ship's shields. The shuttle slammed into the secondary sensor array just above the bridge, a localized supernova of sparks and twisting metal. Before the bridge crew could even register the breach, a shadow moved amidst the wreckage. Marshal D. Teach stepped out of the smoking ruins of the shuttle. He wasn't wearing a vacuum suit. His chest was bared to the thin, freezing atmosphere of high orbit. His skin hardened into a glossy, metallic black by a coating of armament hockey so thick it defied the vacuum. His observation hockey pulsed, guiding him through the debris. The darkness of his fruit swirled around him, creating a localized pocket of gravity that held the air from the shuttle's cabin against his skin for a few precious minutes. He leaped. The bridge crew of the Vigilance looked up in horror as a massive, laughing silhouette slammed onto the external transparasteel of the command bridge. Teach was perched like a gargoyle on the very nose of the Star Destroyer, his boots cracking the reinforced glass. Admiral Corlin stared, his mouth agape. He saw the missing teeth, the wild beard, and the jewelry-clad hands raised high. He saw the white spheres of energy manifesting around the pirate's fists. He's outside," the Admiral whispered. "How is he outside?" Teach roared, a sound that shouldn't have carried through the vacuum, yet it resonated in the bones of everyone on the bridge through the sheer power of his will. "The stars are free!" Teach shouted, his voice a psychic hammer. "And you're just another wall in my way!" He pulled both fists back, the Gura Gura no Mi spheres glowing with the intensity of dying suns. He didn't just punch the bridge. He grabbed the air, the very fabric of the localized space, and pulled. Crack. The sound was a tectonic groan that echoed through the entire 3-kilometer length of the Star Destroyer. Visible fractures appeared in the vacuum itself, spider-webbing out from Teach's fists. The bridge transparasteel, designed to withstand capital ship fire, shattered into a billion diamonds. The atmospheric decompression began instantly, but Teach didn't move. He used his darkness to anchor himself to the hull, a black anchor in a storm of escaping oxygen. He stepped through the shattered window, his boots thudding onto the polished floor of the bridge, as the last of the Imperial officers were sucked into the void. Admiral Corlin was clinging to a command console, his face turning blue, his eyes bulging in terror. Teach walked toward him, the gravity of his Yami Yami no Mi neutralizing the decompression pull around his immediate person. He reached down and grabbed the Admiral by his tunic, pulling him close. "Nice ship," Teach whispered, his voice vibrating with the quake still rippling through the floor. "But it's a bit too stiff for my liking. It needs to learn how to bend." Teach raised his hand and punched the central command pillar. The shockwave traveled downward, shearing the structural supports that connected the bridge tower to the main hull. Outside, the Star Destroyer began to groan as its spine literally snapped under the weight of the artificial quakes. The Vigilance didn't explode, it folded. The massive engines at the rear continued to push forward, while the front half of the ship stalled, causing the vessel to crumple like a tin can in the hands of a giant. "Zee ha ha ha! Look at that!" Teach laughed, watching through the shattered bridge as the Star Destroyer began its slow, terminal tumble toward the atmosphere of Nar Shaddaa. The pride of the Empire, broken by a man with a fist. He turned his back on the dying Admiral and looked at the holomap still flickering on a secondary console. The coordinates for Algora were there, burned into the system. He reached out and tore the console from its housing, tucking it under his arm. His hockey flared again. It was a warning, a cold, sharp spike of dread. Far off in the blockade, the Devastator was turning. Its main batteries were aligning. Vader had seen enough. The Dark Lord wasn't going to capture him. He was going to erase the entire sector to ensure Teach died. "Jax, get the shuttle's emergency pod hot!" Teach roared into his comlink, which was crackling with static. He didn't wait for an answer. He ran back toward the wreckage of his ship, leaping over the bodies of Imperial officers. As he launched himself back into the void, the vigilance exploded behind him, a final, defiant gout of flame that lit up the night of the smuggler's moon. Teach tumbled through space, his darkness acting as a shroud, until he slammed into the open hatch of the Fate's Hands escape craft. Jax pulled him in, slamming the airlock shut. We just killed a Star Destroyer," Jax panted, his eyes wide with a mix of worship and pure, unadulterated fear. "With your hands. You killed it with your hands. Zee-ha-ha-ha!" Teach leaned back against the bulkhead, blood leaking from his nose from the strain of the vacuum and the power he'd unleashed. "It's a start, Jax. It's a start. Now, get us to Algora. I've got a date with a crystal heart, and I don't want to be late." As the escape craft jumped into hyperspace, leaving the burning wreckage of the Imperial blockade behind, Blackbeard closed his eyes. He could feel the power of the Gura Gura no Mi humming in his marrow. He had tested himself against the metal of this galaxy and found it wanting. Now, he would test himself against its spirit. The blue-white tunnel of hyperspace was the only thing keeping Marshal D. Teach from the crushing reality of his own ambition. Inside the cramped confines of the stolen escape craft, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and the copper tang of blood. Teach sat on the floor, his back against the vibrating bulkhead, his massive chest heaving. The vacuum of space had left its mark. His skin was mottled with broken capillaries, and his lungs felt like they had been scrubbed with Corellian sand. But he was laughing. It was a low, rattling sound that made the Deveronian mercenaries huddle in the far corner of the cabin, clutching their blasters as if they could protect them from the man who had just dismantled a Star Destroyer with his bare hands. "Zee-ha-ha-ha. Did you see their faces, Jax?" Teach coughed, spitting a glob of dark phlegm onto the deck. "The invincible Empire. They build their walls so high because they're terrified of the ground. They think if they stay in the sky, they can't be touched. But I am the ground. I am the very earth that rises up to swallow them." Jax didn't look back from the pilot's seat. His hands were trembling so violently, he had to lock his elbows to keep the ship on its trajectory toward the Algora system. "Captain, the Vigilance had a crew of over 9,000. You didn't just break the ship. You erased them." "The strong live and the weak are the meat for the strong," Teach roared, slamming his fist into the bulkhead. The metal dented, and the ship groaned in protest. "That is the only law that matters, whether you're on the Grand Line or in this sea of stars. Don't pity the dead, Jax. Pity the men who still think they can hide behind a badge or a title." As the Pirate King nursed his wounds with a bottle of fermented juice, light years away, a much colder darkness was gathering its strength. On the bridge of the Devastator, the silence was absolute. It was a silence born of pure, unadulterated terror. Lord Darth Vader stood at the massive viewport, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Below him, the smuggler's moon of Nar Shaddaa was still burning, a fractured jewel in the dark. But Vader's gaze wasn't on the planet. He was staring at the expanding cloud of debris that had once been the Vigilance. "Report," Vader's voice rumbled, the rhythmic hiss of his respirator the only heartbeat in the room. Admiral Piet stepped forward, his face ashen. He had seen many horrors serving the Sith Lord, but the sensor logs from the Vigilance's final moments were something else entirely. "My lord." The ship was not destroyed by an internal malfunction or a rebel strike. External sensors recorded a localized gravitational collapse centered on the command bridge. Just before the breach, a massive humanoid was detected on the hull. He appeared to strike the atmosphere itself. Vader turned slowly. The black mask was impassive, but Piet felt a sudden, sharp pressure on his windpipe. A warning, not a kill stroke. "A humanoid," Vader repeated. "Without a vacuum suit. Without a craft." "The sensor data confirms it, my lord," Piet gasped. The energy readings were unlike any force signature on record. It wasn't a push or a pull, it was a fundamental distortion of space-time, and the darkness. The ship's scanners were blinded by a localized void that seemed to inhale light and energy. Vader released the pressure. He turned back to the stars, his mind reaching out. He had felt it. During the battle, he had sensed a hole in the Force, a place where the living energy of the galaxy simply ceased to exist. It wasn't the coldness of the dark side, which was a presence. This was an absence, a hunger. "He is not a Jedi," Vader mused, more to himself than to the Admiral. "A Jedi seeks balance." A Sith seeks dominion. This creature, he seeks only to consume. He is a wound that walks. Shall I prepare the fleet for pursuit, my lord? No, Vader said, his hand drifting to the hilt of his lightsaber. He has taken the transit codes. He is heading for Algora. He seeks the Kyber heart. He believes that by amplifying his primitive power with the crystal, he can challenge the Emperor. Vader felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity. Not the curiosity of a scholar, but that of a predator encountering a new species of prey. This Marshal Teach was a chaotic variable, a man who followed no code and feared no god. He was a pirate in a galaxy of soldiers. Prepare my personal shuttle, Vader commanded, and alert the garrison on Algora. They are not to engage. They are to draw him into the heart's chamber. I wish to see this void for myself before I snuff it out. Back in the Fate's hand, the alarm for hyperspace reversion began to chime. Teach stood up, his height forcing him to hunch his shoulders. He reached into his sash and pulled out the second sister's red lightsaber. He ignited it, the crimson blade casting his bearded face in a hellish light. He swung it once, awkwardly, the weightless blade feeling wrong in his hand. He preferred the heavy, bone-crushing impact of his quakes, but he understood the symbolic value of the weapon. Algora, Jax announced, his voice cracking. We're coming out, now. The ship surged back into real space, and the viewport was filled with the blinding brilliance of the crystal moon. Algora wasn't made of rock. It was a geode the size of a world. Its surface was composed of jagged spires of translucent quartz and raw kyber, reflecting the light of the system's white dwarf star into a kaleidoscope of colors that could blind an unprotected eye. At the moon's north pole sat the Imperial Research Facility, a sprawling complex of black durasteel that looked like a tick buried in a diamond. There it is, Teach whispered, his observation hockey flaring. He could feel it now. Deep beneath that black metal was a concentration of energy so vast it felt like a second sun. The Kyber heart. It was singing to him, a high-pitched frequency that resonated with the Gura Gura no Mi in his bones. Captain, the planetary shield is up, Jax shouted. The rebels gave us the frequency, but if they've changed it, they haven't, Teach said, his eyes fixed on the facility. The Empire is arrogant. They think their walls are enough. They don't expect a man to come through the front door and tear the house down from the inside. As the shuttle dived toward the crystalline canyons, weaving through the jagged peaks of Kyber, the Imperial batteries remained silent. Teach's hockey prickled again. It was too quiet. There were no TIE fighters, no orbital mines. They're letting us in, Jax whispered, realizing the horror of the situation. It's a trap, Captain. They're luring us in. Teach threw his head back and laughed, the sound filling the small cabin with a defiant, boisterous energy. A trap? Zahahaha. Of course it's a trap. That's how you know you're heading toward the treasure. If it were easy, every coward in the galaxy would be a king. He grabbed his heavy flintlocks and tucked the lightsaber into his belt. He looked at his hands, where the black smoke was already beginning to swirl in anticipation. Let them open the door, Teach growled, his voice dropping to a gravelly, terrifying rumble. They think they're bringing a wolf into a cage. They don't realize they're letting a black hole into their heart. The shuttle cleared the final canyon and headed straight for the main hangar of the Algora facility. Above them, the stars were suddenly blotted out by a massive shadow. The Devastator had arrived. The stage was set. The pirate, the Sith, and the heart of the galaxy were about to collide in a symphony of quakes and darkness. The hangar of the Algora research facility was vast, sterile, and eerily empty. As the Fate's hand skidded to a halt, its landing struts groaning against the polished black deck, there were no greeting parties, no alarms blared. The only sound was the dying whine of the shuttle's engines and the distant, crystalline chiming of the moon itself, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very teeth of those who heard it. Teach stepped off the ramp, his boots echoing like cannon fire. Jax followed him, his blaster drawn and shaking, while the assassin droid scanned the rafters with its sensor eye. The air here was different. It was ionized, charged with the immense output of the kyber crystals being processed below. It made the hair on Teach's arms stand up, and his observation hockey was screaming. They're watching, Captain, Jax whispered, staring at the darkened observation galleries above. The whole facility. It's like a graveyard. Zahahaha! Let them watch, Teach shouted, his voice booming through the hangar. He didn't look at the galleries. He looked at the massive blast doors at the far end of the hall. They've set the table, Jax. It would be rude not to eat. The heart is just behind those doors. I can feel it. It's like a drum beating in the earth. As if answering his command, the doors began to retract. Beyond them lay a central corridor carved directly into the moon's crystalline crust. The walls were raw kyber, glowing with a soft, pulsating blue light that shifted to violet as Teach walked past. The further they descended into the bowels of the moon, the more the technology of the Empire gave way to the natural majesty of the geode. Teach's Gura Gura no Mi was reacting violently to the environment. His hands were humming, small cracks appearing in the air around his knuckles without him even trying. The kyber was an amplifier, and it was sensing the vibrations of the man who could shatter worlds. "Stay here," Teach commanded as they reached the threshold of the inner sanctum. "Captain?" Jax asked, looking into the blinding light of the chamber ahead. "This isn't a place for little birds, Jax," Teach rumbled, his expression turning uncharacteristically grim. "The light in there, it'll burn the soul out of a man who isn't ready to carry the dark." Teach stepped into the inner sanctum alone. The chamber was a sphere of pure translucent crystal, 500 feet across. Suspended in the center by massive magnetic tethers was the kyber heart. It was a jagged mass of crystal the size of a heavy freighter, white-hot and vibrating with such intensity that the air around it was blurred. It was the concentrated essence of a world, a living battery of force-reactive energy. And standing on the catwalk leading to the heart was a figure in black armor. Darth Vader didn't move. He stood with his back to the pirate, watching the heart pulse. The red glow of his chest plate was the only stain on the room's pristine white radiance. "You have come a long way to die, Marshal Teach," Vader said, his voice amplified by the resonance of the crystals, making it sound like the moon itself was speaking. "Zee ha 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 ha! Die? I've already died once in the dark, Vader." Teach walked onto the catwalk, his massive weight making the Durasteel bridge sway. "I didn't come here for a funeral. I came for a promotion. The Emperor uses these crystals to build his little toys, but he doesn't understand them. They aren't just fuel, they're a lens." Teach raised his hands. "Imagine what happens when I pour my darkness into that heart. No more Star Destroyers, no more fleets. Just one man who can reach across the galaxy and snuff out a sun like a candle." Vader turned, his cape swirling. "You speak of power you cannot comprehend. The Force is not a tool to be wielded by a scavenger. It is a master. And you are an abomination, a void that does not belong in this universe." "Then fill the void, Lord Vader," Teach roared, his face contorting with a mix of rage and ambition. "Show me the strength of the dark side." Vader's lightsaber ignited with a snap hiss. In the crystalline chamber, the crimson blade didn't just glow. Its light was caught and refracted by 1,000 facets, filling the room with a blood-red haze. He moved with a speed that defied his mechanical bulk, a blur of obsidian and fire. Teach didn't draw his pistols. He slammed his fist into the air. The quake hit the catwalk with the force of a falling mountain. The Durasteel buckled and snapped, but Vader didn't fall. He used the force to anchor himself, his blade carving a path through the shockwave. He lunged, the red blade whistling toward Teach's neck. "Kurozu!" Teach's palm erupted in black smoke. The gravity well didn't just pull Vader, it seized the very force energy Vader was using to move. The Sith Lord felt his connection to the dark side flicker, not because it was gone, but because it was being drained into the pirate's hand. For the first time in a decade, Vader felt the weight of his own armor, the phantom pains of his scarred body returning as the force buffer was siphoned away. He was yanked forward, his lightsaber sputtering. Teach caught Vader's wrist in his massive, jewelry-clad hand. "I told you, didn't I?" Teach hissed, his breath hot against Vader's mask. "Your force is just more light, and light belongs to the darkness." He slammed his other fist into Vader's chest, point blank. This wasn't a quake designed to shatter a ship. It was a localized, high-frequency vibration meant to pulverize internal organs and machinery. The sound was a dull thud crack that echoed through the sanctum. Vader was sent flying across the chamber, slamming into the crystalline wall with enough force to create a crater. His respirator let out a ragged, mechanical wheeze. The red blade of his lightsaber extinguished. Teach didn't wait. He turned toward the kyber heart, his eyes wild. He leaped from the broken catwalk, his darkness swirling around him like a cloak, and landed directly on the vibrating surface of the massive crystal. "Now!" Teach screamed, his hands sinking into the white-hot surface of the heart. "Let's see what the stars look like when I turn out the lights." He began to funnel the Yami Yami no Mi into the Kyber. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. The pure white light of the heart began to turn a bruised, sickly violet. The high-pitched singing of the crystals transitioned into a low, guttural moan that shook the entire facility. The gravitational pull of the moon began to shift, the very crust of Algora cracking as the lens of the heart began to amplify Teach's void. Across the room, Vader rose. His armor was cracked, his cape torn to ribbons, and his respirator was failing, but the dark side was pouring out of him in a desperate, cold tide. He didn't use his lightsaber. He raised both hands, and the Kyber crystals in the walls began to glow with a dark, vengeful fire. "You will not have it," Vader rasped, the force static crackling around him. The Sith and the pirate were now locked in a battle for the very soul of the moon. Teach was the black hole, trying to consume the heart's power, while Vader was the iron will, trying to crush the intruder with the weight of the galaxy's pain. Outside, the Devastator began to drift, pulled toward the moon's surface by the erratic gravity. The crystals of Algora began to shatter, raining down like a diamond storm. The what-if had reached its tipping point. The man who never slept was finally dreaming, and the dream was a nightmare that would swallow the stars. The air in the inner sanctum did not just vibrate, it tore. The Kyber heart, once a beacon of pure, focused light, had become a pulsating orb of obsidian and violent violet. Marshal D. Teach stood atop the crystalline mass, his legs braced, his fingers buried deep into the glowing cracks of the heart's surface. He was no longer just a man, he was the eye of a cosmic hurricane. The Yami Yami no Mi, amplified 10,000-fold by the Kyber's resonance, was projecting a field of absolute zero gravity that reached far beyond the walls of the facility. Outside, the very atmosphere of Algora was being sucked toward the North Pole, creating a terrifying, silent vacuum that turned the sky into a swirling drain of stardust and debris. "Ziha-ha-ha-ha, do you feel it, Vader?" Teach's voice was a ragged, distorted boom, his vocal cords straining against the gravitational pressure. "The galaxy isn't built on light. It's built on the hunger that lives beneath it. Your emperor thinks he's a god because he can move pebbles with his mind? I am moving the stars." Blood poured from Teach's eyes and ears, the amplified pain of his devil fruit threatening to snap his mind. Every vibration of the Kyber heart felt like a sledgehammer to his nervous system, but his ambition was a shield thicker than any hockey. He was a man who had waited decades in the shadows of the Whitebeard pirates. He was not going to let a little agony stop him from grasping the throat of destiny. Across the chamber, Darth Vader was a silhouette of defiance against the blinding, dark radiance. His mechanical systems were screaming, the life support readout on his chest was a frantic staccato of red warnings, and the internal cooling fans of his suit were whirring at a pitch that sounded like a dying engine. But the Force, the true, unbridled dark side, had never been stronger. He drew upon the terror of the thousands of Imperial soldiers dying in the crumbling facility above. He drew upon the pain of his own charred flesh. Vader raised his hand, not in a gesture of a crush, but as if he were reaching through the very fabric of reality to seize the pirate's heart. "You are nothing," Vader rasped, his voice cutting through the gravitational roar. "A glutton, choking on a power that will consume you." With a violent motion, Vader pulled. He didn't pull Teach, he pulled the raw Kyber spires that made up the walls of the sanctum. Hundreds of jagged, ton-heavy crystals tore loose, flying through the air like guided missiles aimed at the center of the void. Teach didn't even look. He released one hand from the heart and swung a massive, backhanded punch into the empty air. "Quake! Burst!" The Gura no Mi, fueled by the heart's energy, didn't just create a shockwave, it shattered the local dimension. The incoming Kyber spires didn't just break. They were vaporized into fine, glowing dust, as the air itself fractured into a million glowing shards. The shockwave slammed into Vader, throwing him backward through a structural support beam of solid durasteel, which snapped like a dry twig. But Vader was a veteran of 1,000 wars. As he flew, he ignited the second sister's lightsaber, the one Teach had dropped in the struggle, with a burst of force will. He hurled the spinning red blade like a boomerang, guiding it with the Force. It didn't aim for Teach. It aimed for the magnetic tethers holding the Kyber heart in place. The red blade sheared through the primary stabilizer, the heart lurching, the gravitational field wobbled. "No!" Teach roared, his hockey flaring as he sensed the imbalance. The Kyber heart dropped 3 meters, slamming into the base of its housing. The resulting discharge of energy was enough to level a city. A wave of pure, white-hot force lightning erupted from the point of impact, washing over Teach. He screamed, a sound of genuine, bone-deep terror and pain, as his darkness fought to inhale the overwhelming surge of light. His skin began to crack, glowing from within, as the Kyber energy sought a way out of his physical vessel. Vader, sensing the opening, lunged. He didn't use a saber. He became a conduit for the Force, his gloved hand glowing with a sickly blue aura of Sith sorcery he rarely invoked. He slammed his palm into the base of the Kyber heart, injecting the full, cold weight of his hatred into the crystal to destabilize Teach's rhythm. The collision of the two powers, the void of the pirate and the will of the Sith, turned the inner sanctum into a localized black hole. Outside, the Devastator, the pride of the Imperial Navy, finally lost its battle with the moon's shifting gravity. The 3-kilometer-long ship groaned as it entered the atmosphere, its hull glowing cherry red. It wasn't crashing. It was being pulled directly toward the research facility. The ship, Jax's voice came over the comms, high-pitched and sobbing. "Captain, the Star Destroyer is coming down on us. We have to go. The whole moon is going to blow." Teach looked up, his vision blurred by blood and violet light. He saw the massive triangular shadow of the Devastator descending through the shattered dome of the facility. He saw Vader, his mask cracked open, revealing a single, pale, scarred eye, filled with a cold, murderous resolve. "Zee-ha-ha-ha. Ha!" Teach's laugh was a wheeze now. He looked at the Kyber heart, then at the approaching doom from the sky. He had a choice. Stay and try to master the heart before the ship crushed them all, or take what he had already devoured and flee to fight another day. A man's dream never dies, but a man has to be alive to see it come true. Teach's expression shifted from manic ambition to a dark, calculating pragmatism. He reached deep into the heart one last time, not to control it, but to trigger a final, catastrophic release. "If I can't have this world's heart," Teach hissed, his voice echoing in Vader's mind, "then nobody gets the world." He punched the heart with both fists, unleashing a black hole quake of such magnitude that it bypassed the physical and struck the metaphysical. The Kyber heart didn't explode. It imploded. The resulting shockwave sent a pulse of null gravity through the entire moon, momentarily arresting the fall of the Devastator and throwing Darth Vader across the room like a discarded doll. In the blinding flash of the implosion, Teach wrapped his darkness around himself and his nearby crew, who were screaming in the doorway. He didn't run, he sank. He used the Yami Yami no Mi to swallow himself into his own pocket dimension just as the inner sanctum collapsed into a sea of white fire. The Devastator slammed into the facility a second later, the impact of the Star Destroyer and the death of the Kyber heart combining to create a supernova on the surface of Algora. The crystal moon, the geode of the galaxy, shattered. 1,000,000,000,000 shards of Kyber were hurled into the vacuum of space, turning the Algora system into a graveyard of light. When the dust settled, the Imperial Research Facility was a smoking crater of molten glass and twisted metal. There was no sign of the pirate. There was no sign of the Sith. Only the silence of the void remained, cold and indifferent to the dreams of men or the tyranny of empires. The shattering of Algora was a scream that echoed across the galaxy, felt not in the ears of sentient beings, but in the very marrow of their spirits. On Coruscant, within the spire of the Imperial Palace, Emperor Palpatine paused in his meditation. He felt the sudden, violent extinction of a world-sized geode, but more importantly, he felt a wound open in the Force, a place where the dark side did not rule, but was simply absent. For the first time since the rise of the Empire, the Master of the Sith felt a tremor of genuine, cold uncertainty. The balance had not shifted toward the light or the dark. It had been punctured by a void. In the vacuum where Algora once hung, a swirling nebula of Kyber dust and shattered durasteel was all that remained of the Devastator and the research facility. Deep within the core of a massive drifting chunk of crystalline crust, a pocket of absolute shadow began to bleed outward. It didn't dissipate into the vacuum. It curdled, growing more dense until it spat out a mangled, scorched Imperial escape pod. Inside, Marshal D. Teach slumped against the controls, his chest heaving. His fine silks were charred to his skin, and his wild beard was singed, but his eyes were glowing with a terrifying violet-black light. He clutched his chest, where a fragment of the Kyber heart, a shard the size of a man's fist, still pulsing with a bruised radiance, was fused into the darkness of his palm. He had not just triggered the implosion, he had inhaled its essence. Zee-ha-ha-ha. Ha! The laugh was a wet, broken sound, but it carried a weight of triumph that could have flattened cities. Do you see, Jax? The galaxy? It's just like the sea. You just have to know how to sink to the bottom to find the real gold. Jax, curled in the corner of the pod, and shivering from the sheer proximity to the Kyber-infused darkness, could only stare. He looked at Teach and didn't see a pirate or a man. He saw a living event horizon. The pirate's very presence now distorted the light within the pod, making the stars outside look like elongated smears of white paint. We have to go, Captain," Jax whispered. "The Empire will send everything. They won't stop until this whole sector is dust." "Let them send their fleets," Teach roared, standing up and nearly shattering the pod's ceiling with his bulk. "Let them send their God Emperor. I've tasted the heart of their power, and it was sweet. I'm not just a pirate anymore, Jax. I'm the king of the void." Teach turned his gaze toward the viewport. His observation hockey, now amplified by the Kyber shard, stretched across the parsecs. He could feel the panic of the Imperial officers in the nearby systems. He could feel the growing hope of the criminals and the outcasts who had seen the darkness defy the Sith. He saw a galaxy of trillions, all bound by the chains of order, and he saw how easily those chains could be turned into a noose. The Blackbeard pirates were no longer a small crew in a stolen freighter. In the weeks that followed the Algora incident, the name Marshal D. Teach became a virus. On Kessel, Nar Shaddaa, and Tatooine, the story of the man who broke a Star Destroyer with his fists and survived a duel with the Dark Lord of the Sith spread like wildfire. The lawless elements of the galaxy, the ones the Empire had spent decades trying to crush, found a new banner. It wasn't the sunburst of the rebellion, it was a flag of 3 skulls and a field of black. Teach didn't hide in the Outer Rim. He established a new Hachinosu on the volcanic world of Mustafar, seizing the ruins of an ancient Sith fortress and turning it into a sprawling pirate haven. He didn't care about the dark side's history. He only cared that the world was a jagged, violent place that suited his temperament. Thousands of ships, smugglers, deserters, and hunters flocked to his call. He didn't offer them freedom or democracy. He offered them the chance to take whatever they were strong enough to hold. Across the stars, the Empire pivoted. Darth Vader had survived the crash, pulled from the wreckage of the Devastator by his own iron will and a desperate squad of purge troopers, but he was changed. His new armor was reinforced with Kyber-resistant alloys, and his obsession with Teach had become a singular, burning directive that bypassed even the Emperor's commands. The galaxy was now a 3-way war zone, the oppressive order of the Empire, the desperate hope of the rebellion, and the absolute chaos of the Blackbeard pirates. Teach sat on his throne of molten obsidian, looking at a holographic map of the deep core. The Kyber shard in his hand pulsed, and for a moment, the entire room flickered into shadow. He could feel the presence of the Emperor on Coruscant, watching him through the Force. "A man's dream never dies," Teach whispered, his voice vibrating with the power to shatter planets. He looked at the fragment of the heart, then up at the ceiling of his fortress, as if he could see through the rock to the stars themselves. "And my dream is just beginning. The sea was too small. This galaxy, this will be the place where I finally become a legend that time itself can't forget." He raised his right hand, and the air cracked. He raised his left, and the light vanished. Between the two, Marshal D. Teach laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy in the face of eternal war. The pirate emperor had arrived, and the stars would never be silent again. Conclusion. The arrival of Marshal D. Teach has fundamentally fractured the destiny of a galaxy far, far away. The Empire's myth of invincibility lay shattered in the crystalline dust of Algora, and the rebellion found itself forced to contend with a monster that hated their enemies but cared nothing for their cause. Blackbeard did not just enter the Star Wars universe, he consumed its status quo, replacing the binary struggle of light and dark with a terrifying, unpredictable void. Darth Vader now hunts a shadow that cannot be grasped, while Emperor Palpatine prepares for a war that his prophecies never foretold. Meanwhile, Teach sits at the center of a growing empire of outlaws, his power growing with every world he shatters and every soul he swallows into his darkness. The Kyber Void he has created is a ticking time bomb at the heart of the galaxy, a power that threatens to unravel the very Force itself. But for Teach, this is simply the greatest adventure of his life. He is a man who follows the wind of his own ambition, and that wind is blowing toward the core. The battle for the ultimate throne has begun, and the stars will bleed violet before the end.